The concept of race can be very difficult for some people to grasp. Some confuse race with nationality and culture. For example, three people from the same country that have the same culture can be completely different races. Here's an example. All of these men are from the same culture and have the same nationality. They're all Puerto Rican. They're all Hispanic. And they're all from Latin America. However, Ricky Martin is white. Tego Calderon is black. Someone like Daddy Yankee is biracial. Jimmy Smits is mestizo, which is a mixture of European and Native American. So all of these men are different races, but they're all the same nationality. And that's because nationality, ethnicity, and culture are not synonymous with race. Some people also believe that there's only one race, the human race. This isn't correct, as human is a species. They are of the genus Homo, and races are technically further subcategories of the human species. Some people also believe that race doesn't exist. It's not real. Race is a social construct. Let's address race as a social construct. That concept really is about how people are viewed racially in different societies. For example, in the United States, some people may not view an Italian or Mediterranean person as white. Believe me, it's true. I've heard some men say, she's not white, she's Italian. She's not white, she's Spanish. Whereas in other parts of the world, those same people are viewed as white. Some people may view biracial people as black, whereas in countries like South Africa, they are viewed as non-black. Or how about a biracial person could be classed as black in the south of the United States, but some people might assume that they're Dominican or Puerto Rican on the East Coast, and that same person might be mistaken for Mexican in California. You take that person to a particular part of Africa, and they may be classed as white, or even colored if they're in South Africa. So race can be dependent on your location or the society you're in. So that's what people mean when they say race is a social construct. It's a label that may be placed upon you based on how people view you or based on their assumption of what you might be. For example, in the United Kingdom, they don't really have a Hispanic community. So when they see a Hispanic person that looks like Rick Gonzalez, they don't say, oh, that's a Latino or that's a Hispanic person. They see them as biracial. But the idea of race isn't always a differing social construct depending on who's looking at you or where you are in the world. For example, Justin Bieber is considered white anywhere he goes. Wesley Snipes is considered black wherever he goes. For the people that say race doesn't exist or there's no scientific standing or evidence for race, that's not necessarily true. They say there's no gene for different races. However, they can dig up the bones of a human being and tell you whether they were black, white, or Asian, or even what part of the world they descend from based on bones, skeletal structure, and even skull shape. That's known as forensic anthropology. Police use this all the time to ascertain the race of skeletons they found. So there's definitely a lot of merit to race within science. Now, I mentioned skull shape, and this is very important for this topic. When I was younger, a Somali man told me he was Caucasian, and I thought he had lost his mind. But that's because racial classifications are actually based on skull shapes and have very little to do on how you look, in terms of the color of your skin, your hair, or your facial features. The scientific labeling of race does not correlate with the social aspect of it. Socially, if you have dark skin, curly hair, and specific facial features, you're basically seen as black. However, scientifically speaking, skin color doesn't determine what race you belong to, because skin is very adaptive, and there are people with different colors that share very similar features, and people that have very dark skin but would not be classed as black, and are not even of African descent. Skin tones are not a good indication of ancestry or race. For example, people in the Horn of Africa, Somalis, Ethiopians, have been classified as a sub-branch of Caucasian by anthropologists. They determined that they were of the Caucasoid group based on cranial measurements, despite having darker skin. Caucasoid and white are not the same thing from a science standpoint. These classifications of race were originally introduced to science by Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish man in the 1700s. He placed humans into 4 racial classifications. This work was later expounded upon by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, a German in 1795, who put humans into 5 racial classifications. I won't bore you with the history of these two men, but I'll paraphrase on what their studies were. In short, these men came to the conclusion that particular groups of people from certain regions of the world shared specific skull shapes. Johann Blumenbach divided all humans into 5 groups, defined both by geography and appearance. In his classification, he placed people of Europe, the Middle East, South Asia, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa into the Caucasoid category. Yes, they placed people from Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, India, and Saudi Arabia in the same category as people from Europe. I'll address this a little more in a moment. The Mongolian or Mongoloid variety for most other inhabitants of Asia, including China and Japan, the Native American variety for the native populations of the Americas, and the Malay variety for the Polynesians and Melanesians of the Pacific and the Aboriginal people of Australia, and the Negroid variety for the dark-skinned groups in West, Central, and Southern Africa. Some of you may wonder why he used the term Caucasian or Caucasoid in his classification for people of Somalia, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, when the African people under that classification were not from the Caucasus region. This is a very simple answer. When Johann Blumenbach was creating these labels, he picked the word Caucasoid after the Caucasus region as he felt these were the most beautiful white people on the planet. It had nothing to do with black people originating from there at all. He simply picked the name based on his attraction towards people from that region, and then lumped everyone with similar skull shape into the same category. These classifications later reduced to 4 groups when the Native Americans were placed into the same category as the Mongoloid race. Native Americans are what is known as a subcategory of the Mongoloid race. Johann Blumenbach idolized his teacher Linnaeus and acknowledged him as the source of his original 4-fold racial classification. One of the main differences, however, between Linnaeus and Blumenbach's classification was one of racism and superiority. Linnaeus assigned particular behavioral patterns to each racial category as well as intelligence, which favored the Europeans, whilst Blumenbach's classification was more based on physical characteristics. Blumenbach particularly refuted the common racist claim that black Africans bore unique features of inferiority by stating there is no single character so universal among Africans, but what may be observed on the one hand can also be observed everywhere in other varieties of men. In layman terms, he basically said there are clever people in all races and stupid people in all races. Blumenbach argued that physical characteristics like skin color, facial structure, and hair characteristics and cranial profile depended on geography and nutrition. This was a founding work for other scientists in the field of craniometry. Further anatomical study led him to the conclusion that individual Africans differ as much or even more from other individual Africans as Europeans differ from Europeans. Basically, Africa is the most diverse continent on the planet. Furthermore, he concluded that Africans were not inferior to the rest of mankind in regards to healthy faculties, understanding, talents, and mental capacities, which, as I stated, was the complete opposite to Carl Linnaeus. However, here's where the issues lie. Not everyone of a particular ethnic group has the same skull shape. For example, when identifying black people, they use specific skulls from specific parts of Africa, primarily West Africa, which they refer to as Negroid. They use skulls from China and Japan and label these Asian groups as Mongoloid. But as I mentioned a moment ago, when creating the classification of Caucasoid, they place skulls from Europe, the Middle East, India, North Africa, Somalia, and Ethiopia into the same category, simply based on these people having similar skull shapes. It's obviously very clear to you and I that an Indian man, an English man, and an Ethiopian man look very different from each other, but they were still placed into the exact same category. This makes us realize that all white people are Caucasian, but not all Caucasians are white. What makes this classification even more problematic is not every black person, even in West Africa, has the same skull shape. Not every black person has prognathism, which is when the jaw protrudes outwards, kind of like the Sphinx. And not every white person lacks a strong protruding jaw. Believe it or not, you might see a white person with what appears to be a Negroid skull shape. So now you see where this classification can in some cases be problematic. Somalis and Ethiopians are classed as Caucasoids because of their bone structure, despite looking nothing like white people. So we have race based on the scientific term and race based on the social construct and layman's terms. For example, Negroid or black, Caucasoid or white, and Mongoloid or Asian. But what if you're classed as Caucasoid but clearly not white? They do actually have subcategories like Afro-Caucasoid and Indo-Caucasoid. So someone from India, Pakistan, and parts of the Middle East would be classed as Indo-Caucasoid. And someone from Ethiopia, Sudan, or Somalia, as an example, would be classed as Afro-Caucasoid. So here you have a case of white Caucasians versus dark-skinned Caucasians. Some of you might have heard of that term before, dark-skinned Caucasians, especially when speaking about ancient Egypt. Now, before I go any further, I don't personally agree with these particular racial classifications, but we have to be aware of the labels and science used in order to have a better understanding and a stronger argument. These classifications are the ones used when labeling the ancient Egyptians as Caucasoid. So most of us, well, those of us with some sense would agree that the ancient Egyptians were clearly black and not white. But historians and anthropologists don't actually call the ancient Egyptians white. They refer to them as Caucasian or Caucasoid. Remember what I said, all white people are Caucasian, but not all Caucasoids are white. So this is really a case of word semantics. The ancient Egyptians may have been classed as Caucasoid based on their skull shape, but they were definitely not white. It is believed many ancient Egyptian kingdoms traveled south from Egypt along the Nile into regions such as Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Uganda, Kenya, and parts of Tanzania. These groups of people are placed into two ethnic categories, known as Nilotic and Cushitic peoples, with Cushitic people being primarily indigenous to Northeast Africa, areas like the Nile Valley and Horn of Africa. So places like Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, Egypt, Tanzania, and other regions across Africa. Cushitic people are part of the Afro-Asiatic family, while Nilotic people are part of the Nilo-Saharan family. Nilotic people are normally classed under the Negroid racial category, while Cushitic people are placed under the Caucasoid racial category, although some Nilotes are classified under the Caucasoid category. This is because Cushites and Nilotes have lived among each other for thousands of years, so have combined genetics through mixing. So let's have a look at a Nilotic man from the Shilluk tribe. As we can see, regardless of his skull shape, his skin is clearly highly melanated, and he is obviously black. Remember what I said, all white people are Caucasian, but not all Caucasians are white. So let's compare this man to the pharaoh, Tutankhamun. Many historians have claimed that Tutankhamun was Caucasoid, but you'll notice how similar the mummified remains of the young pharaoh look to this Nilotic man. They share the same teeth, the same lips, the same jawline, the same face shape, the same skull shape, the same slim triangular nose shape. The Nilotic man looks like he could be a descendant of Tutankhamun. So it becomes very clear that the racial classification of the ancient Egyptians is one of word semantics and pro-European language. Tutankhamun may have had a skull shape that scientists like Linnaeus and Blumenbach labeled as Caucasoid, but that didn't make him white. So even by the claim that the ancient Egyptians were Caucasian, they were still clearly black, or Afro-Caucasoid. That Caucasoid term is simply based on their skull shape and not their true race or ethnicity. This man is classed as being Caucasoid, but we'll all agree, although labeled as Caucasoid due to his skull shape, he is without a doubt a black man. So some people who aren't completely clued up on the science assume that when some anthropologists and historians say ancient Egyptians were Caucasoid, that means they must have been white. But no, they're merely talking about their skull shape. Some clearly black people have non-so-called Negroid skull shapes. This skull shape was distinct to a particular group in Africa. Now, we may not agree on the labels used to identify these clearly black people, but now that you know the history and the premise behind it, you're better armed when someone says the ancient Egyptians were white. All white people are Caucasian, but not all Caucasoids are white. Some are in fact black. No historians or scientists actually call the ancient Egyptians white. They refer to them as Caucasian or Caucasoid. It's only ignorant people that refer to them as white. Caucasoid is a term based on the skull structure, not the skin tone. The Caucasian race has different types of subraces or subgroups. What we call the Caucasoid race includes India, the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. So it's pretty obvious that the ancient Egyptians looked a lot more like this rather than this. So we have to understand the terminology and the words used and not get it confused. Peace, love, and coconut oil. Hey man, that's racist. Please remember that from now on, brand new never before seen videos, as well as live streams, will only be available on my website, ikyg.com, via a Patreon subscription. ikyg.com is a Black-owned, Black-ran platform, 100% free from censorship. It's the only place where we don't have to worry about what we say and expressing ourselves. Make sure you check out the description and the comment section for important links, as well as information in video form that shows you what benefits you get when you support the site and join my Patreon. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, then don't forget to subscribe and be notified every time I upload a video. For exclusive content and perks, check out my Patreon. This is where we have private live streams, group chats, live Q&As, live phone calls, and open topics. This is a safe space where you can interact with other like-minded people, make friends, send each other direct private messages, and so much more without any trolls. And yes, you get to use GIFs and images in the live chats. So what are you waiting for? This is a completely independent website, free from censorship. If you'd like to make a donation towards the site so we can continue to put out the truth without fear of being silenced, then please hit that donation button. It's greatly appreciated. Check out the rest of the site for videos, private and public live streams, find out all the tea, and make sure to utilize the Black Money section of the website. Advertise your business absolutely free to people that look like you, free forever. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at angel_IKYG.